Hi everyone. It's not uncommon for people on opposing sides of an issue about which they feel passionately to accuse the other side of being a cult. And I trust that when we do this, we know that we're not using any official definition of what a cult actually is. What we mean is that many of those on the other side behave in what we see as a cultish manner. It would perhaps be more accurate to call them a pseudo-cult. I know quite a lot about cults, not because I've ever been near one in real life, but they are a subject on which, just out of interest, I've done quite a bit of reading and research, and I'm going to state at this early stage that I know there are important differences with actual cults as defined by academic researchers, those providing information and support to people affected by cults, or those involved in deprogramming people who have escaped from a cult. There is a difference between officially designated cults and what I and many others call the gender cult, the gender ideology cult, the gender identity cult, the transgender cult. All of these terms describe pretty much the same people, and there are some things about those people, what they say and how they behave, that I find so sinister that I feel that calling them a cult is justifiable, and I'm about to explain why. And please note, those I describe as cultists are those who promote or defend gender ideology. People often say, trans people aren't a cult, how dare you, sort of thing. I haven't said they are. Plenty of trans-identifying people do not promote gender ideology, and in fact, the person I first heard use the term trans cult back in 2017 was Miranda Yardley, a trans-identifying male, and he was using it in condemnation of those who push the ideology. In my experience, the majority of people who behave in the cultish way I'm about to describe are not even trans-identifying. Okay, maybe nowadays many call themselves non-binary because that's an easy way to be in with the in crowd without actually doing anything physically harmful or permanent to themselves. Here is a typical example of what is said. Trans people aren't a cult. If any group is a cult, it's GC people. Of course, they would say that, and it's up to them to argue that case. Given how diverse we GC people are in terms of our politics and beliefs, given the fact that we do actually present arguments backed by evidence, and given how much we squabble and criticize each other publicly, good luck with that. I would call all of the real cults deliberate cults. Of course, they don't call themselves cults because that's derogatory, but they were set up for a specific purpose, and they very cynically recruit people to fulfill that purpose. They are inward looking, and they are very much about acquiring wealth and other nice things for the leadership. Very often they start with just one charismatic leader. Although the promotion of gender ideology in every sphere of life is very deliberate, I would call the gender cults maybe an accidental cult. I don't think those who fund and push ideology at the highest levels necessarily intended to create the armies of mindless, moronic and violently inclined automatons that we see protesting everything they perceive to be in opposition to their creed and who are ultimately harming it. I came across this tweet by Luke Anderson, who is a trans-identifying female who years ago won the reality TV show Big Brother UK. And here Luke is showing the Nazified version of the misnamed progress flag and saying, "Hand on heart, in my opinion, this is what it's coming to." You can probably imagine the reaction to that from the kind of people Luke was referring to. Here's an example, replete with irony. What a disgustingly evil, heartless, distasteful thing to post. The LGBTQ plus community don't single people out. Is this guy for real? The one thing that the gender lunatics do unfailingly, and again, a disclaimer, a lot of people who do it aren't any part of the alphabet soup. In reality, they are straight allies. But one particularly deranged and despicable thing they do is single people out and try their best to destroy them. Okay, they don't commit atrocities by putting minorities into gas chambers, but it's not as if some of them wouldn't if they could. The hate they express for people who oppose them are so very often expressed in terms of wanting us dead. TERFs are literally the worst slime to congeal on the surface of the earth. You'll be in the gas chambers soon enough, though. Wonder why this person is anonymous. You've got this all wrong, especially when literal Nazis are supporting Posey Parker and her GC cult, but you don't single anyone out, right? They have turned out like this because although they have swallowed the ideology hook, line and sinker, which means that they've bought into the idea that transgenderism is normal and simply another example of human diversity, and that trans-identifying people are a marginalised and oppressed group akin to homosexuals and ethnic or cultural minorities, although they may have bought into that narrative, they can't actually argue rationally and coherently for any of it. So instead, they lie, they parrot facile slogans, they demonise their opposition, particularly women, trying to keep men out of our single-sex spaces, jobs and sports. Now, let's consider the things they say and do. Firstly, grooming and indoctrination. When I say grooming, I'm not necessarily talking about grooming for the purpose of sexual exploitation and abuse, though I'm not ruling it out. Grooming means persuading someone vulnerable to trust you and preparing them for an activity by putting ideas into their head. So not quite the same as indoctrination, which means getting people to accept ideas uncritically and without question. Real cults use very crude brainwashing techniques. I think what happens in the gender cult to teenagers and young adults is less crude, more insidious, in some cases even inadvertent, but the results are not that different. I would argue that every celebrity who virtue signals with their public pronouncements of support are participating in grooming behaviour, just as they used to say that every smoker is a recruiter of smokers. When I was a kid, all the coolest celebrities seemed to be smoking a cigarette whenever they were photographed, whenever I saw them being interviewed on TV. They made it look glamorous. So now we've got the likes of Emily Watson and Daniel Radcliffe and loads of others making acceptance of a deeply regressive ideology look cool. This is not like sing if you're glad to be gay. It isn't. It's like saying, if you feel there's something wrong with you, you're probably right, and you can do something very drastic to your body to change it, and it might make you feel better, though you can't know beforehand if it will or not. Celebrities and indeed politicians are not doing this with young people's best interests at heart. They are doing it for their own best interests as they perceive them. But the worst groomers are trans-identifying.
Shit. Welcome to the sisterhood.
Welcome to the sisterhood, says a man calling himself Summer to another man. This is one of the most insulting notions I've seen to come out of this cult. I copped a lot of flack for calling Summer Look a groomer, and still to this day I'm getting frequent comments saying all he's doing is spreading positivity, making people feel comfortable in whatever gender they want, just sharing her life and stories with everyone. How heartwarming. Comments like these show just how successful this indoctrination is, talking about genders as if they are lifestyles and about womanhood as if it is some state that you can achieve even if you're a man, like Summer Look. And people are going, oh, so positive, so heartwarming. No. What would be positive is telling people that they are all good just as they are. And if they want to be gender non-conforming in how they express themselves, how they dress, what name they adopt for themselves, if they want to challenge stereotypical expectations of their sex, that's fine. It's probably just a phase anyway. But even if it isn't, it's absolutely fine. Summer Look has now disappeared from public life, and I'm not sorry, because telling kids of one sex that they can be the other sex on the basis of how they feel is a lie. It's wrong. And don't bother justifying it by claiming that sex and gender are different when you can't even define gender in any meaningful way. Munro Bergdorf came under fire a few years ago for encouraging kids to contact him directly for support. Someone to talk to like a big sister. You deserve to be happy. This is grooming behaviour. These people seem to have no sense of what is inappropriate behaviour towards kids and what child safeguarding is all about. The worst culprit is Jeffrey Marsh.
I want to talk to the kids. Parents watch the video and then hand the phone over to the young kids. Hi there.
Who's made many really creepy videos. The encouraging of young people to turn away from those who in most cases and for all their faults do love them and truly believe they have their best interests at heart. Note that I am being tentative in my language here because I do know there are exceptions and some families are terrible, and I can well imagine them driving their children into the gender cult or any other cult to escape them. But encouraging young people to turn away from any kind of family, good or bad, and find replacement relationships and families in people who don't really love them or care about them at all is typical of real cults, and it's one of the similarities the gender cult has with real cults. And I want to make special mention of the effing teachers who think they are entitled to override parental responsibility, not for any legitimate reason, not because they suspect a child is being abused or neglected or anything to do with safeguarding, but because a child has decided that he or she is transgender. Here's just one example, which even goes against the directions of their own boss, the head teacher. And we recently had this nutty woman teacher. It was widely misreported, I should say, as there being a child who was allowed to identify as a cat at school. I understand that was fake news, when the story should have been about the ridiculous misinformation the teacher is putting out and the manner in which she spoke to a couple of 13-year-old girls. One of them recorded about 3 or 4 minutes of the conversation, and I have heavily edited it to just highlight the worst of what the teacher says.
But where do you get this idea from? There's only two genders.
I just think it's my opinion.
It is not an opinion. Gender is not linked to the parts that you were born with. Gender is about how you identify.
I just don't agree with that. So why should I have to listen
Biological sex, there is actually 3 biological sexes, because you can be born intersex. You can be born with male and female body parts or hormones. In terms of gender, there are lots of genders. You were talking about the fact that cisgender is the norm, that you identify with the gender of the sexual order that you're born with, or you're weird. That's basically what you're saying, which is really despicable. And why do you think we have so many problems in the world with homophobia?
I'm fine with lesbians and gay people.
Same.
I've got nothing against them.
There is a link between it, and you're saying that people can't change
No, they
who they want
can't.
to be.
They can't.
Gender
Because
is
you've got
about
those genes.
how you identify.
I
How
just
you
don't agree with
identify.
it.
Yeah,
But
just
it's
fine.
not an opinion that
Yes,
we're
it is.
expressing this
Yes,
school.
it is.
No, it's not. And if you don't like it, you need to go to a different school. So
I did go to a
I'm
different
reporting
school.
you to Miss Willis. You need to have a proper educational conversation about equality, diversity and
I ain't
inclusion,
doing it. My mum
because
doesn't
I'm not
let me.
having that expressed in my lesson.
How is it even possible for a teacher to be teaching that there are 3 sexes and lots of genders and you can change who you are? I do want to keep off gender ideology itself in this video as far as I can, and focus on the slavish adherence to it as exemplified by this woman. The way she was rebuking the girls in such a nasty and intolerant manner, calling their opinions, which were based on truth, despicable, and saying they should find another school, and that she wouldn't have them expressing a contrary view to her own sacred nonsense in her lesson. That is not education. No, it isn't. That is a cult. Now, I know I've talked about Benji before. She's one of the young women who appears in Abigail Schreier's book, who was under immense academic pressure at home from her demanding parents who had an unhappy marriage and seemed to take it out on their daughters. She was persuaded by the video accounts made by trans-identifying influencers that she was trans herself. And she set up her first Tumblr account and quietly announced herself as trans to viewers. She wasn't sure anyone would take notice. To her surprise, she received an overwhelming love bombing from strangers. Those are her words. And they were telling her how brave she was and asking how they could help her. She says, "There's just so much positive reinforcement that there's just no room at all for any criticism or any thought that something bad could be happening." Yes, love bombing is a particularly strong feature of deliberate cults and the gender cult. I've shown examples of this in previous videos. Here's a bit of a recent video I made.
I'm a guy. And I'm gonna go by Theo. Yeah. I told my mom today, and I was afraid I was gonna get thrown out of the house. We love you, Theo.
It just beggars belief, but you can imagine how Theo must feel getting all that love and admiration and validation, especially if she's actually a lesbian at a time when lesbianism is apparently considered uncool by many young people unless it's straight men LARPing as women. Especially if she suffers from anxiety, depression, is on the autism spectrum, or suffers any kind of disadvantage that affects her self-esteem. In my summer look video, I also showed how all someone commenting beneath his video had to do was announce she's realised she's a guy, to have other commenters, people who know nothing about her at all, start love bombing her. And just look at a few of the responses to this woman's announcement. "I support you. You're an amazing, handsome man." Well, that's obvious from the photo. "God made you a beautiful boy, and whoever says otherwise is dumb, says the person who writes like an overexcited 12-year-old. May God bless you, Kevin. Good job discovering how he made you." What's this? Gender ideology meets young earth creationism. "I wish you luck on your journey, and of course, I'll pray for you." Well, that's jolly nice of you. "Good luck on your journey, dude. I hope you find your happiness being your authentic self. We're so proud of you. We support you with our full heart. Sending you strength, my dude. It's not easy to be trans right now." Not easy. It's never been easier. That's why you're all doing it. My God, what are you talking about? But it's better than pretending to be ordinary and not self-obsessed and attention-seeking. So happy for you. And so it went on and on and on. This is what love bombing looks like in the internet age. It's so bizarre. Nobody, not a single one of them, questioned her, said, "Well, that's a strange thing to think. What is it that makes you think so?" It was all, "Oh, that's so cool. We love you. And even this is God's plan." The opposite of love bombing, I'm not sure if it's called hate bombing, but that fits well enough, is also a huge part of being in a cult, and the gender cult is no exception. In the recent video I did on detransition and regret, which is where the clip of Theo I just showed comes from, by the way, I gave some examples of how nastily they treat detransitioners and de-sisters. Here's another one. There's this little lass who was at Kelly J's Let Women Speak event in Glasgow.
So I was in the trans community from the ages of 12 to 19. I have since detransitioned, and everyone I had ever been friends with, I had ever known, and I had ever thought loved me has left me. If you look over there, you'll see everyone, they look so confused and so indoctrinated, and truly they are. They have no idea that the second that they question that, they'll be thrown away like rubbish. They are nothing. You can throw them away just as easily as you got them. Those people that are willing to let them cut themselves up to feel whole again, they don't love them. Yeah. They never will. Yeah.
Normal people don't abandon friends because they've changed their mind about how they want to live their own lives, as long as they're not choosing to do anything weird or harmful. Only a cult sees someone deciding they're not trans after all as harmful, and they do see it as harmful because it undermines what they claim is true, what they want people to believe, which is that some people are trans, just as some people are gay. It's innate, and people know who they are from even the earliest age. And it's not just detransitioners, of course, it's those people who still call themselves trans but who don't go along with the worst of the ideology and are therefore called quislings. Not just traitors, but quislings, as in the Norwegian guy, the Nazi collaborator whose name gave rise to the term. It tends to be the same names that keep coming up: Caitlyn Jenner, Blair White and Buck Angel. This guy thinks that the American conservative commentator Michael Knowles and his fellow Nazis are going to murder them, presumably because Knowles said he wants to see transgenderism eradicated from public life. I think it was a daft thing to say. He handed the cult a stick to beat him with, more fool him. As well as those, there's Debbie Hayton and Rose of Dawn, who are transphobic quislings. How can you be transphobic when you call yourself a trans person? What this tells us is just how the word transphobia means disagreement with the ideology, nothing to do with an irrational fear or hatred, which is what a phobia actually is. Also, Miranda Yardley, Fionn Orlando, and whomever the other quislings du jour are. Again, Debbie Hayton and Christina Harrison, who campaign against legal reform to the Gender Recognition Act, are quisling hams who rely on praise from extremist TERFs. It's just so irrational. Why would they choose to do the more difficult thing if they didn't genuinely believe it, when it would have been easier just to go along with and get respect from the cult? And this is one about 7 Hex. Anyone who still calls themselves a transsexual is a quisling who sides with our oppressors for head pats and table scraps from the high table, and their opinion on what is or isn't transphobic is to be laughed at and dismissed. What? He's guilty of some great betrayal for preferring to call himself transsexual after having had genital surgery. Why? That's 7 Hex a couple of years ago, by the way, begging for table scraps from one of his oppressors. He's the one in pink. This is cult-like control of what people are allowed to think and say and do, and if they don't toe the line, they're quislings. And these quislings certainly don't walk in lockstep with each other. They have a variety of political opinions and views about transgenderism. So far as I know, the one thing they have in common is that they don't deny biology. They don't deny their actual sex. They are all open about the fact that they are male or female in Buck Angel's case, and that makes them the worst kind of cult traitor, because trans women are women, no debate. The whole no debate meme is very cultish. The objective here is to achieve acceptance of an unsupportable belief by discouraging questions. That's what cults do. That's what the gender cult does. But why no debate? They never give a reason for why somebody's claimed identity can't be questioned. What is so sacred about identity that you can't question it?
A person's identity and who they are is never up for debate, like ever.
People like Jermaine Greer made good progress for feminism, but her feminism has stopped at a point where it's not willing to accept that trans women are women, and that's the problem.
Why must there be no debate? We know why. It's because they can't debate it. Many of them are so brainwashed, they don't realise that it's even possible to debate it. They don't realise it's an ideology. They have somehow managed to convince themselves that they are talking facts, and all they need to do is state them.
Woman, adult human female. Woman, adult human female. Woman, adult human female.
Yeah, you know what chromosome is?
Yes.
Okay, right. So, well, clearly you don't if you're saying that a man can be a woman.
They're not men.
They're women. Okay, and I'm asking you, how did you get to that conclusion? How? You're saying you understand biology, but then you're saying men can be women.
They're not men.
So what are they?
They're women.
How are they women if they have a penis? No, how are they? How are they? If you have a penis, how can you be a woman?
Typically, a cultist believes that those they refer to as trans women are women, trans men are men, because of their brains. They'll say this is the scientific and medical consensus. It certainly is not. Therefore, trans women are not a threat to actual women, and they should use the spaces they feel comfortable in, regardless of how other users, actual women, feel. And this is what matters, because you can believe whatever nonsense you like if it causes no problems to anyone else. And of course, if you disagree with them, even if you provide evidence that quite explicitly contradicts what they say, then you're a bigot and a transphobe. But it doesn't matter what evidence we provide of either sexual violence or just violence of some trans-identifying men, whether in women's spaces or not. It's just water off a duck's back to the cultists. They may deny it or gaslight us. They'll accuse us of judging all trans-identifying people by the actions of a few, no matter how many times we say the problem is that they are men. Minority of all men are predatory, are abusive, regardless of what they call themselves, and trans-identifying men are no exception. But the cultists just don't care. They don't care. It's like they have lost touch with their humanity. Nothing you say penetrates. The treatment of all of us who dare to publicly oppose gender ideology is really quite extraordinary, quite unlike anything that has been seen before in modern liberal democracies. The lengths they will go to try to shut us up. I mean, they have no conscience about causing people to lose their livelihoods. Of course, the more famous one is, the more opprobrium they attract. Thankfully, they are never going to be able to ruin J.K. Rowling, but they would if they could. And for what? For daring to express an opinion they don't like, but one that is based on biological truth and actual experience of women. Davina McCall is the latest big celebrity target for having the temerity to recommend a series of podcasted interviews of J.K. Rowling by Megan Phelps Roper. Her offending tweet was actually a response to Buck Angel, who recommended the podcasts. Davina, who, by the way, is an extremely famous and popular TV star, a household name in the UK, she responded to Buck Angel by agreeing with Buck's view of the podcast. The condemnation was instant. Of course, she was called a transphobic bigot and all the usual stuff, but even the mildest comments were from people not calling her nasty names, but just expressing their deep disappointment. How weird. Disappointment in what? That Davina was brave enough to say she liked a podcast involving J.K. Rowling? I mean, how cultish is that? This one stands out as particularly absurd. Look at her outing herself and being recruited by the gender exceptionalists. I haven't heard that one before. Davina hosted Big Brother when Nadia won, and now she's doing this. Nadia Almada is another trans-identifying person who won Big Brother UK back in 2004. And onto the list she goes. This is mind-blowingly stupid. And of course, they won't even have listened to those podcasts themselves, just as they never read JK's essay setting out her views. They won't read anything by Janice Raymond, Kathleen Stock, Helen Joyce, Sheila Jeffries, Cara Dansky, etc. They won't even look at my website because it's called Peak Trans. They don't want to hear the arguments. The only media most of them will consume is written by people promoting their ideology, and anyone who criticizes it becomes a target of hate and attempted censorship and personal ruin. Okay, I've run out of steam, although I feel like I've only scratched the surface of the mountain of evidence that justifies calling people in thrall to gender ideology cultists. There are so many more examples of cult-like behaviour, and it can feel quite overwhelming at times. They are irrational, closed-minded, intolerant of any dissenting views, and totally brainwashed. That's all. Thanks for watching.